I saw a werewolf with a Chinese menu in his hand.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect the view of Wolfpack Research or any of its officers. The views and opinions expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on this program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. We are not investment advisors. We hold no registrations with the SEC, FINRA, or any other regulatory agency, and none of the opinions expressed on this podcast should be considered investment advice. The listener should assume that we have positions in and stand to benefit from any stock or other security mentioned on this podcast. Do your own research before making investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wolf Den, everybody. This is Dan David joining you again here with Carl the Sound Guy. I know. But today, to make up for Carl being here, because I can't do a show without Alpha Dogging Carl, we have Richard Teitelbaum with us. Somebody who actually knows a thing or two about short sellers. Why? Because he actually wrote the book on it. He's a New York-based journalist and author specializing in the financial markets. He is also the author of The Most Dangerous Trade. Dun, 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 dun. He's currently a senior contributing writer for Institutional Investor magazine, my favorite. His career includes stops at all the financial publications of note. He was an editor and contributor for corporate finance at the Wall Street Journal, my old job. Editor, director, institutional investor overseeing editorial operations at Institutional Investors Sovereign Wealth Center, a web startup covering $6 trillion sovereign wealth industry. At Bloomberg News, where he had 23 cover stories, covered topics such as hedge funds, investment banks, and the financial crisis. At the New York Times, he was the investing editor for the Sunday business section. At Fortune magazine, he was a columnist for most of the 90s. His signature investigative reports examined the TARP bailout, the disclosures of nonpublic information by the U.S. Treasury Department to market participants, and the New York Federal Reserve role in the AIG takeover. His book, The Most Dangerous Trade, How Short Sellers Uncover Fraud, Keep Markets Honest, Make and Lose Billions. On top of all of this, I should say, he's also a punk rocker.
A former punk rocker.
Oh, really?
I'll interject here.
Welcome to the show, Richard. But you are going to have to before we get into The Most Dangerous Trade or any of that stuff. I want to hear about it. How does a former punk rocker from the 80s and 90s become a foremost financial journalist?
Well, I don't know about foremost financial journalist, but actually what got me involved was, full disclosure, my father was a journalist and a pretty successful one. But there is something that connects those things, which is if you're kind of rejecting things and you're skeptical about the world around you, in particular New York City in the late 70s, it gives you a little bit of don't want to say cynical, but a skeptical attitude towards, you name it, government, business, culture, museums, rock music. And skepticism is I'd say that it's a prerequisite for any kind of journalism that's worth reading or listening to. You got to be there and say, hold it, does this make sense? And what does this figure mean on the balance sheet? And why is it going down or why is it going up? Just asking those questions just along the lines of, why do we have Ronald Reagan as our president? Who is this crazy mayor that we have? Why are there junkies camped out in front of my apartment in the East Village? So you're asking questions, and that's a good thing for a journalist, and certainly skepticism. Does that make sense?
It does, and it makes sense as to why you're, I don't know if it's attracted is the right word to short sellers, but why you gravitated towards writing about them. They're skeptics in general. As far as, junkies on your stoop, hey, you're a punk rocker. It comes with the territory. Junkies are going to be on your porch. There you go. I think it does in a way. It's kind of a rebellion against the system. Do you find yourself still kind of thinking that way in your writing and in the people you choose to write about?
Someone much wiser than myself said that journalism is writing things that someone doesn't want you to read.
I don't remember Carl saying that.
Everything else is just advertising. So yeah, it does help. I think writing the stuff that people don't want out there is that's a great incentive, and that should be kind of the lodestar for journalists, and not to preach, but I think more journalists, as opposed to just simple breaking news or social media tweeting and kind of opinions that aren't backed up.
What took you to, well, I guess I should talk about my own personal experience with you, because I don't even know if you know. But I remember there was this guy, and his name was Richard Teitelbaum. You might know him, who called me in like 2014 and said, I hear you're kind of a short seller, geo investing, whatever, blah, blah. What can you tell me about Carson Block? I'm writing a book about him. I believe this book, The Most Dangerous Trade or whatever, was your first incarnation to just write about Carson. Then it became about something else. And he just became a chapter because he's just not interesting enough to be a book.
I wouldn't say that. But actually, I wrote a story. My recollection is that I wrote a story about Carson, and that was folded into my book. And I at least talked to him, and he was the one that gave me the idea that, I'd read about Manuel Asensio. I'd read about Jim Chanos from some of the work of my colleagues at Bloomberg, and I was itching for some unknown reason to write a book, because I thought it would make people like me more, or, that I would become, the film rights would be sold and I'd be able to retire.
Uh-huh.
And then, so after talking to Carson, I actually said, hold it, I let me open this up. And I never got a chapter review in the book, but that's okay, because very few people read it. So
no, I have a copy. I did read it. Carl actually asked me today. He's like, hey, did you ever read? I was like, of course I read it. Look, I found it to be an interesting book because, number one, certainly in 2014, there was not a chapter to write about me. There still isn't. But I didn't know Carson very well back then either, so it wasn't very helpful to you. I think there was one quote in there from me to you that you included where I said, this China stuff is dangerous and somebody could get killed. At that point, Kuhn was arrested.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That was a pretty close thing for Kuhn. He's still not right, by the way, for anybody keeping score in the China hustle, and the guy who spent 2 years in their version of a gulag. And you did end up making it in a movie after all. So I think you did a star turn on the China hustle, right? You were there.
Yes, it was mercifully a very short point, but I do thank the producers and directors for including me.
Oh, the hell with them. I don't thank them for including me. And then I met you at a premiere in East Hampton. Right? All of the people you interviewed for that book, who was the most interesting? Who was the least interesting? Give us a story. Give us something about The Most Dangerous Trade that's gonna inform us while we're reading it, for those who may read it for the first time.
From what I could gather, the most interesting people were, obviously, I was really interested in Carson Block.
Boo.
There was Manuel Asensio.
Oh, he's interesting.
He's a character, and he's also has over the decades, has been extraordinarily successful in identifying targets and causing trouble, not least of which for himself. On the other side, I'd say, and I should say that Jim Chanos is, I found his business the most interesting. And I kind of view him as the professor, the dean of short sellers, because his business model was quite successful and is just on how he structures his firm and what he's been able to achieve. His being able to codify short selling, the different types of short sales. And the less interesting people, I should say, when I use the word less interesting, it's like, hey, this person's almost normal. Right. You know, it's very, very, so, you know, I don't want to but like Bill Fleckenstein out in Seattle, just, you know, a totally it seemed to me, maybe I'll be proven wrong, well-adjusted man running a small amount of money, married to his not a college sweetheart, but you know, the woman he met at his first job, and a lot of his short selling was often based on valuation, which worked really well in 2000 and 2001 and 2002, but
not so much now. Not so much now.
Not too well. No, I think, and maybe, I mean, you know this. I mean, have you begun to think that the metrics that we've grew up with Graham and Dodd of, you know, price to earning, price to book, that those are not necessarily the best metrics to gauge valuation? That may be a secular change. I do not know.
Well, my opinion is they always were and always will be, whether it's important right now because everything is kind of viewed from like a biotech lens, right? You know, biotechs don't make money and most will never make money and nobody really cared in that space. They're just unreasonable investors, right? They get very attached to their phase 2 or phase 3 trial. Well, now every stock is that way. I mean, nobody cares whether they make money, but at some point, rationality will come back to the market and making money will matter again. Back to as far as like when you're saying most interesting, least interesting, I would, one little bit of pushback is, you know, Carson's one of the least weird people I know. I mean, like he's very profane and, you know, he's a pretty, for what you and I know about short sellers, like how freaking crazy they can be, pretty sane. And Jim Chanos is actually the most normal guy I've ever met. Now, he might be super smart, and he is. But as far as grounded, down to earth, right, that doesn't kind of take you out there into outer space, like, you know, God bless you, maybe Manuel does. Asensio, who's, you know, very, very intelligent at finding fraud, as you had pointed out, but probably one of the foremost people I know at stepping on his own dick every year or two and getting in trouble with FINRA or something else just because he can't control himself. A lot of short sellers are that way. And I would think that, yeah, Fleckenstein, sure. David Rocker, very normal guy, right?
Reasonably so, from what I could tell. Never met him in person, talked to him on the phone. But Shad, I believe it was Shad Rowe. It may have been somebody else who he was a short seller in Dallas, I believe. But he said that short sellers are people. It's not that you're born a short seller, but that your mom dropped you on your head as an infant, and that's why you're engaged in short selling.
Yeah, it's tough on a good day. I don't think that people kind of realize that the negativity that it can breed, like you're always looking for what's wrong. And then it can start to, you know, take you outside of work, where in your personal life, you're starting to always look for what's wrong. And there's always something wrong, but it's just a much better headspace to be looking for something right, especially in your personal life. So it can be very tough that way.
The damage that can be done psychically as you go through and everything you see is bad. It's thievery. It's people die, you know, just lying. I think, but to your point, and I hate quoting Nietzsche because everybody recognizes the quote, but it was, is be careful when you go hunting
for monsters.
When you go hunting monsters, that you don't become one. When you look into the abyss looks into you.
So maybe tied to Nietzsche. Interestingly, that you didn't mention him in the interesting or more exciting of the short sellers. I mean, your chapter on Ackman is the grandstander of the shorts, but he's not included in your little list here of who you thought was interesting.
But before you answer that, Richard, I just want to point out, did you say Nietzsche?
Nietzsche.
Okay.
Nietzsche.
I said Nietzsche.
I know Richard said Nietzsche. I just wondered if Carl thinks he's like, some Italian aristocrat from the 1600s.
Medici, you mean?
Yeah.
That's
Carl, are you an Italian aristocrat?
You can't got too far, huh? No.
So, okay. I'm interested in that question. How, the Ackman, the grandstander of them all, I guess is how you put it?
Well, yeah, he at the time, I wasn't going to include him, and I was wrapping up my reporting, and I think I wasn't in the air. I was in a car service back from the airport when he opened up his Herbalife campaign, and I said, and I was all excited to sit down and start writing it, and I said, "Oh, I have to go now. I have another chapter to write." And I will point out that Bill Ackman did not cooperate with me. I did not interview him. I have never, which I think I may be the only journalist in the Eastern Seaboard that he has not talked to.
I think you might be.
Yeah.
No, and it was fine. I was, there was enough in the public domain, and that was fine. And the results of the Herbalife campaign, which I'm kind of still, that's a great tale of the dangers of short selling.
Right, and still losing a lot of money.
Yeah. I mean, this is a really, the epitome of a short squeeze and what happens when you're on the wrong side of that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I never talked to him. He does talk a lot, if he wants, which is, God bless him. But, I did not talk to him. So I can't say, I can't. So
he just denied your request to, like you said, I'm writing a book. You're going to be a chapter in it. And he's just like, yeah, no, I'm not interested.
I think the backstory, I read an article at the time that had just come out by William Cohen, in my recollection, which I guess you could perceive it as being negative. And I think he was fed up with journalists at that point and that was the reason. And I didn't turn back and ask him the way I did other, kind of reconsider, that kind of thing. I just said, I can do this.
All right. Well, two things there. One, I guess you got him back with the title of the chapter, The Activist Grandstander. Love it. And two, you kind of just said you circled back with some people who originally said no. Who said no that you had to go back to and say, come on, talk to me?
That was Jim Chanos, actually.
Really?
Yeah. No.
Everybody else was just, come on down, fly out. Great.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Well, listen, Ackman, to be fair, was probably busy battling it out with Icon. So,
Yeah, no, I didn't hold it against him. And
that's the lesson.
And to be honest, I did not write the head for the chapter to get back at him. The fact is, he was probably the most public and gathering the most attention.
Yes, you did.
No. Now, Dan, you've had bad experiences with headlines that I didn't write.
No, don't even get me started.
Jewelry counter manager.
Just so that's not what he's talking about. That was the first headline. I was short sellers earn their chicken wings or some shit like that and that was a Bloomberg one, which your favorite,
which article
yours
was that?
And everybody else's favorite place to work. Richard, for the background, was did a profile, an institutional investor on me when I had my lapse of judgment in 2018. And the original title was Bourbon Swilling Short Seller Wants to Fuck Up Congress.
And there's a problem with that?
My problem with it was that their justification for bourbon swilling was Richard and I went out for one drink after a police
friend of the police.
Event. And okay, I mean, is that swilling? I don't.
Well, remember we went back and forth about this. I didn't write that headline, and I believe it was changed.
Contrarian candidate or something like that. You wanted.
I can't remember what, but first of all, you did have 2 drinks, and I remember going back and forth.
It was a double.
It was 1 glass.
But that's still 1 glass.
Swilling just means imbibe. We went back, and Carl, just so you know, I sent him Merriam-Webster's dictionary's definition of swilling, and he was sending me a Google definition of swilling, and
sources, right? I mean,
at one point, and I respected this about you, Richard. I really did. At one point, you were just like, "Listen, I didn't write the title. I didn't necessarily want the title, but this is taking up too much of my time at this point. I don't care, and I need to move on to other things." And I was like, "Oh, okay, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah,
I totally, I'll take it up with I," which we did, and they changed it to bourbon drinking or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just loved at a certain point. You're like, okay, I'm going to go back and forth with you 3 times, and we'll send each other links of what swilling means, and then I'm going to be done with it because I have a job and I've got to go do it.
Yeah, you're not the only person to have complained about a headline. Some with justification, some without in my career. You're right that at some point I just turn it over to the editor and say, "This is your job,"
deal with it.
Yeah,
which is fair.
I was not used to somebody that was writing an article, because I've had a few done, being as thorough. Like, this guy called my high school football coach.
Really?
Yeah, and teachers, right? Who I think were less complimentary than you actually put in the article, but still, it was the thoroughness of doing it.
They were pretty good, and if you want to understand somebody, I have my theory here on profiles is you've got to get to somebody before you get a feel for them in high school or college. If you can get the college roommate or the one across the hall, you may find out something that's making them tick there, and either good or bad, and so just finding that. And the thing is, we get older, it becomes more and more difficult to track those people down. Certainly professors begin to pass on. Roommates don't remember you. Girlfriends.
You were right on time. My coach died last year. So.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I was sorry too. I actually went back to Michigan for his services. But I think you're right. And it strikes me as you're talking about this that I'm just thinking to myself, man, you'd have made a pretty good short seller. I mean, because that's one of the things that we do that's differentiated, right? I mean, I remember one of the first reports we ever wrote was on Sino Clean Energy, and the law firm that sued us absolutely freaked out that we included in our report that we spoke to a store clerk outside the factory. And that kind of comes back from my upbringing of, General Motors factories in Flint. The people who knew most about what was going on the factory floor were the businesses servicing it. And you've got to think out of the box. And for you to say, okay, I can talk to somebody's colleagues that they work with now, somebody's peers that they work with now, you're basically going to get the group think of who that person is now. Going back to who they were 30 years ago does get to the root of the problem.
Yeah. Or, that's where the genius first, showed itself.
Well, in my case, root of the problem.
Root of the problem. Yes. Okay. No, and it actually is fun. And it has sort of there's a sleuthing element to it.
I bet.
Tracking down and there are people that are better than this with this than I am, but tracking down that person. I do draw some lines. I tend not to talk to children or ex-wives. Although I did quote one ex-wife, but it was very complimentary of the person. So that was
ex-wives tend to have maybe a
large axe.
Yeah, maybe. Or an ex-husband or
Yeah.
Non-gender binary, past mate,
Partner.
whatever.
Life,
We're just
life
going to say it
partner.
all correctly now.
Life partner.
I go through the entire day trying not to offend somebody in this way. On that subject, when you've done this in the past, have you ever found when you're doing background on somebody, kind of deep background from 20 years earlier, a real nugget you're like, wow, this really just made it all worthwhile?
I'm wondering how honest to be with you that
Well,
yes.
I mean, just really kind of honest would be fine.
Well, no, okay, because there is.
I mean, look, if there's something you're not comfortable with, we can come back and take it out.
No. It's just simply this, that I mean, there are a couple of things. I've discovered medical conditions which I don't think is necessarily pertinent. I've found children that were I'd say psychological problems that I didn't want to include, even if it was pertinent. On the other hand, I've also found people, sadly, it wasn't hidden in any way, shape, or form, but, a hedge fund manager who had lost 2 of his children who had died. And I didn't know whether to include it, but I realized that was one of his motivating factors. It's sad. A person went on to great success.
How did he feel about you including it?
Oh, no, he confronted it very, I swallowed hard when I asked him the question as to how important, and he grimaced and said, yes, that's why I'm doing what I'm doing now. And that's all I needed to ask, move on from there.
So, I can see from you discussing this that when you had to go to this individual and ask him that question, you did swallow hard. You seem a little emotional about it yourself. The kid thing is a real hard and fast rule with you, it seems like.
Yeah, it is. Unless they're in prison, I guess. And it should be a matter of, and if it's a matter of public record, which I think in this case it was, so it was not like I'd been finding, snooping around his garbage, the guy's garbage or hurt stuff. It was.
That's overrated, by the way.
Well, it depends on whose garbage, I suppose.
Everybody thinks that's a major technique. It's really not that I know of. Not since who's a really interesting guy, Kurt Feshbach days.
Yeah.
Back with the Feshbach brothers in the 80s, you kind of maybe had to dig through garbage a little bit. But nobody really digging through garbage now involves probably hacking somebody. So that's the
right. And also, I mean, by the way, isn't the legal? What there's legalisms around that I don't.
I think there are now more than there were in the 80s. I don't really know the legalisms around it. I think it's also by state, but I don't do it, so I've never really had to find out whether that's legal or not. I know exactly what state you can surreptitiously record a conversation.
New York, yes.
Yeah. New York, New Jersey, yes, you can do that. Pennsylvania, not so much.
It's not necessarily surreptitious. It's just, are you disclosing this? I think most journalistic organizations will say that you're supposed to inform the person. I think unless you're planning on broadcasting it, I'm not that. I don't think full disclosure on that really. I don't know how much that is implemented.
Well, I'm always planning on broadcasting it. So, and when I don't,
okay, well,
we don't
yeah,
tell
but
people it's surreptitious, according to Pennsylvania, anyway. Which is why we, have to go to another state when and if that's a necessary thing to do, or somebody in my organization in another state will do it. Even something as small as that can really just derail you if you're not following all the rules.
Right. I think you get more leeway as a journalist, by the way.
Yeah. Yeah. And And when you're speaking to a journalist, if you're not assuming you're always on the record, you're just a moron. You're a moron. I will say that most journalists I've ever spoke to really consider sacrosanct the off the record. Now we're off the record, and you guys really don't go beyond that when you're off the record. But if you don't say that, you're on the record, correct?
Yeah, that's it. You're on the record. And no, blurting out something incredibly witty and telling and then saying that's off the record. No, that does not work. Sorry.
That's right. That's right. That does not work. And they're really unhappy with that, I bet. Has that happened to you?
Yeah. Once with, of all people, the former CEO of Exxon, his line, I asked him whether he was going to sue somebody. I think it was Shell. I said, "Are you going to sue Shell?" And he said, "Why not? It's the American way." And which is fine to say, but as Exxon, it's like you, and they had just gotten through not just gotten through, but 15 years earlier, they had gone through the Exxon Valdez. Yeah. And I was like, no, that's on the record. And then, and then, and Manuel Asensio, who I believe, don't quote me on this, right? Don't quote me.
No, this is just between us. Go ahead.
Just between us. He asked to have removed the best quote, and I'll read it to you. And it was, he had been disbarred by FINRA for, I really couldn't, it was running an unlicensed broker dealer, but it wasn't really a broker dealer, and it just went on. And basically he was kind of being stubborn, and and whether he should have been disbarred, I'll leave it up to other people. But he made this full-fledged effort to have the bar released, lifted on him. And I said, "Well, why is this so important to you? You don't really need it for in your current position." And he said he wanted a happy ending. "I'm interested in clearing my name." He also said that he needs some kind of victory, some sort of redemption. And the quote was and is, "Jesus Christ would be just another dead Jew if he wasn't resurrected," which fits his personality and is actually probably accurate, when you think about it.
Wow.
But may not ingratiate you, would not ingratiate you with the the Anti-Defamation League or whatever,
or Christians or Jews.
Yes,
Yeah.
So
Just a few.
it's a great quote.
Yeah,
And,
I think the Muslims and the Buddhists are fine with it, but Christians, Jews, it's a defamation league. No, I've met him a couple of times, and I've gone back and forth about inviting him onto the show because, gosh, he's just one of the original gangsters when it comes to short selling, and that's richly interesting. But what a wild card. And when you say that, he got barred from FINRA or whatever, I mean, profanity warning coming up, as I understand it from even speaking to him, I mean, he walked into a FINRA hearing and just motherfucked everybody in there.
Yeah. That's the lead of my chapter. It's like him refusing to shake the hands of the FINRA investigator, laughing at him.
I mean, really cursing them out. I mean, he really cursed people out in there. And I mean, cool. As far as the story goes, from what he told me, and I believe it, but don't expect to get your license back. I mean, it's just not going to happen.
Yeah. I mean, that's and maybe that's worth it to him. I suspect.
Well, I guess not, because he wants it back. I mean, to the point to where they were in talks about doing a TV series, kind of.
Yes, HBO. Yes. I interviewed. You know who was going to play him?
John Leguizamo.
Yes. So this, I mean, bless the guy for telling me. He says, "Well, yeah, you ought to talk to John Leguizamo. He's going to play me in HBO." So he gives me his phone number.
Yeah.
And I call the phone number and I go, "Is this John Leguizamo?" And he goes, "Yeah." And I go, Well, look, Manuel, I'm doing an article on, I'm doing a book on short sellers, and there's a chapter on Manuel Asensio. And so he gave me your phone number. What had happened was they had agreed, they'd gotten a screenplay, they'd hired people, they were ready to roll. The guy had been hanging around with Manuel in his office to learn that. And then Manuel said, well, I'm not going to go forward unless the CEO of Time Warner or whoever it is intervenes with FINRA to have me reinstated. And so they scrapped the whole thing. So I call up John, but he didn't tell me any of that, right? So I call up John Leguizamo. He said, he gave me kind of like as a character reference for you. And then the response was, he did? It speaks to the bizarre, magical realist view he has towards the world. He wasted 2 years of my life. Manuel Asensio was a deeply disturbed individual.
Yeah.
And that's just one person's opinion, and I don't weigh in.
Well, it's John Leguizamo's opinion, in all fairness, and he was, by all accounts, including Manuel's, he was vested very much so into playing this character, even though he's like a foot shorter. I guess that doesn't matter in Hollywood, but I talked to Manuel after all of this, and even after the book, and he's John and I are like brothers. We're so close. I can call him right now. And I'm like, no, please don't. It's fine. We're in a Panera, and the screaming and yelling that you've already done in this place is well enough. Yeah. I mean, literally the balls to say, okay, everything's greenlit, got it through HBO, got it all written, got an A-list actor, certainly at the time, to play me. Now I need somebody to call Time Warner CEO and have him intervene with FINRA.
Yeah, which is a little bit out of left field when you think about it. Yeah, magical realism, right?
Yeah.
So, but
and not completely unusual for a short seller. I mean, most guys are like this, believe it or not, right?
It's maybe most. I tried to, I won't mention the names of, there are a lot of people that I talked to who are off the record that I visited with, and that was fine. I learned a lot. Some of them are out of business now. It's been a long time since the book. They would have different takes on things, but as I said, there are also just some supremely really rational, even-headed people who, I would think that this redounds to their benefit in investing because, keeping not having blinders on and being measured in your investment policies. Not everything's going to go to a zero,
right?
As we've learned.
Not everybody that ever bought a stock in the company should go to jail if they're a fraud. I mean, this is like the ridiculousness of it at some time. And I think what you're saying is that, and I agree, this speaks to the longevity of who can remain a short seller over the long period, like a Chanos or a Carson or whoever, rather than some of these people that are just so convicted that they're right that they blow themselves up or their fund.
Yep. The markets can remain irrational longer than you can remain solvent. And the other thing is, I mentioned this happening, but it happens a lot. All it takes is some dumb CEO to come in and say, I'm going to buy that company that you've shorted, and then you're sunk. And they got
like Mallinckrodt. I mean, that happened with Mallinckrodt when they were purchased.
Autonomy was bought by HP. And I think is that still winding its way through court?
I don't follow it. I mean, like, listen, the trade's gone. I've got enough on my plate, but like you're 100% right. There have been many frauds that have been bought out at a valuation higher than you're short, and then you're just screwed, especially if you have a really large position there. So That can happen. Having different financial instruments like credit default swaps or whatever, that'll fuck you up if they go out of business, and has. So it definitely happens to short sellers from time to time, and that does, again, speak to the longevity of how you can stay in this business or not.
I mean, this was an interesting point. Back in the 80s, I forget what year it was, David Tice came out on GE. I think it was 86. It was that long ago, saying this accounting, and I can't remember the specifics, but he went through their accounting and what they were doing with GE Capital is my recollection. That was 1986. So Jack Welch had recently gotten in there. He
was something else with that accounting, wasn't he? And just passed it on.
He actually, there's a Fortune magazine article from the 90s with Carol Loomis, I believe, where Jack Welch said, yes, of course we manage earnings. Our investors deserve it. They need smooth earnings,
Right.
And I read that and read it again, and I was like, no, that's earnings manipulation, right? Is that?
I would think Jeffrey Immelt would have agreed once he took over and had to deal with that. And look, I think he kind of managed it the same way, and then they could only kick that can down the road so far.
Yeah, but look how long it took before the proverbial manure hit the fan.
Well, it's probably a microcosm for, our national debt and how the corporation of the United States is being run.
Yes, maybe. I don't know. You're getting above my pay grade.
Oh, believe me, I'm above mine.
In a way, would that have been call it the birth of adjusted EBITDA?
No, dummy. It wasn't the birth of adjusted.
No, that was the adjusted earning. They had their own they created their own accounting. It had this strange name, which I just remember talking to the very pleasant public relations and investor relations people at GE as they tried to explain it to me. And I'm not sure they really understood it, how they were. It was like,
that's not unusual.
Capital profits or something strange like that. I should brush up on that particular one.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the birth of the quote unquote adjusted. I mean, Carl's point is at least tangential to yours. Whenever a company is making up their own accounting terms to describe their financial picture, that's a problem. And yeah, the adjusted part of whether it's earnings or EBITDA or any kind of multiple that a company makes up that backs out all of these charges that benefit management, it's been a pervasive problem in the market for the past at least 20 or 30 years and continues to be. Real earnings, real GAAP, real accounting is and should be what matters. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I am not entirely sure in how many instances using adjusted and non-GAAP earnings really helps anybody. Maybe you can come up with examples. I'm sure there must be some where it does shine some light, but they don't come to mind.
It just fools investors. I mean, of course, it helps the company. It doesn't help the end investor, in my mind, unless they sell before GAAP catches up with adjusted. And, you look at GTT from 2019, I believe, is when we wrote on them, and it was all of their adjusted kind of metrics that hid the fact that their roll-ups they were overpaying for, and they couldn't sustain it. And now they're bankrupt. And that happens over and over and over again. And that must be something that falls on you to write about from time to time, is like, especially because I guess some of what you do would be a postmortem. You don't know what happened till it happened, and then you're writing about it.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't know what happened even after it happened, and and when you're writing about it, and you're kind of, you want to be clear that I don't think this is going to happen. I'm not sure that this is what actually happened, but here's a scenario. And, can I hang it on to some analyst that I rope in and say, hey, does this sound reasonable? Good, I'll attribute it to you.
You talk to investment bank analysts from time to time?
Oh, yeah, I can.
Why would you?
And do. I find that they are across the board. I want to know what other people are thinking. There's also a baseline of information that that you can learn from them. The baseline about how to approach an industry, not the buy sell, obviously. And one of the things you see is, and the China situation is a great example of this, is you put it out there, you say, it's amazing. One of the evergreen stories of this decade is having to remind people that when you buy Alibaba stock, BABA, you're not buying shares in Alibaba as we know it, right?
We might have put out a tweet like that today.
Yes. This is, but I was like, this has been going on for ages now. You're buying into a variable interest entity, and it's like, and nobody, and it's nice to hear. Like, I didn't know that Yum China did not use a VIE structure. And that's kind of, I was reading this report. They mentioned that. That's interesting for me to know. I'm not writing about it. I'm not investing in Yum China, but that's kind of something I keep there in the back of my head. But with the China stuff, it's amazing how many people with, I believe, TAL education and.
No, that's definitely VIE.
Yeah, that's a VIE, but they lost like 90% of their value. What was the other one that was?
EDU.
EDU. They lost 90% of their value, and you have research reports coming out saying this might be a good buy opportunity.
Sure. I mean, there's always every short report that comes out has an analyst coming out and saying it's a good buying opportunity, and with TAL and EDU and the education sector, and then now fintech with Tencent and the other fintech names that have crashed on that. It's government intervention, which China doesn't give us any kind of heads up on. Believe me, the people in the know there had a heads up, and I'm sure got out of the way or bought puts. But that is definitely a problem. And it's not just the VIE structure in and of itself. It's just a kind of a hostile atmosphere between our governments and investing right now that I would think fiduciaries in our business, who are mutual funds, index funds, the BlackRocks, MSCI, would really try to hedge their risk. And you're right. They're considering it buying opportunities.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And if you want to going back to the short seller and evergreen story, because you had the evergreen mic drop there. Andrew Left wrote on them 10 years ago, and for all of his effort, he was banned from trading in Hong Kong. And basically what he said 10 years ago is what happened.
Yeah, and you can lose a lot of money between now and then, between then and now on this. And because you can you can scream in a forest, but if nobody's listening, it's not going to matter. And that's, by the way, the other company, AOL, these, the short sellers were all over these companies.
Yeah, that was a Chanos thing too.
Chanos did that. I think the other guy who was big on that, in my recollection, was Doug Cass. He was big on AOL, where just simple, he found in some filing with AOL Europe that they were on the hook for billions of dollars that nobody kind of knew. There was a put, and I'm not remembering the specifics of it. There was some sort of put option in AOL Europe, which required the company to buy it back, this unit back, and at some outrageous price. And, he stumbled on this, and it was in a filing God bless SEC filings.
Yeah, God bless them. We read enough of them. It's they definitely are a full departure from the filings you would read about the same company in China, and I have a feeling back in the 90s, maybe there were different disclosure rules in Europe, which led to AOL's demise or their accounting fraud charges here. And that's what you have to go read the disclosures in every country they're in, basically, to see how they match or they don't. It's a very difficult thing to do.
Yeah, it is. Thinking back on China, do you have any? I know macro is not your. I don't know if that's your specialty.
I don't know what my specialty is, Richard. Just go ahead and ask the question.
Okay, so you're a generalist, I guess we call you.
Fine.
Do you think that's what's going on there with the government cracking down on internet companies, education, going that there's a little bit of a push? They're pulling back now, having had this big an explosion in their in the value of their companies, or their economic growth, that now they've reached an inflection point, and they're saying maybe this capitalism thing has gone too far. Maybe we're going to start, maybe Mao wasn't so wrong, is to put a fine point on it.
Well, hold on. Before you answer, do we need an off the record?
I'm missing the joke. What's the joke?
Before you say anything to a reporter, you want to qualify it.
Oh, shut up. Look, for me, for one thing, it amazes me that people don't take President Xi at his word when he is so true to his word.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't necessarily say everything that China ends up doing, but everything he does say that China is going to do, they do. And he has said most of this stuff that, yes, there will be no cult of personalities here in China. There's not going to be an Elon Musk of China, even though Elon Musk thinks he's Elon Musk of China. There's not going to be companies bigger than the state, which is, kind of a tenet for a communist society, right there. That's why they're kind of anti-religion in communism. They don't want God to be above the state. They certainly don't want Tencent or Alibaba to be above the state.
Mm-hmm.
Playing with the greater macro picture as far as global conflict goes, and where the United States and China have diverged and are more diverging, I asked people to kind of picture the fact that, number one, President Xi and almost everybody backing him says they're taking Taiwan. I mean, is it going to be today? No. Is it going to be tomorrow? No. Maybe not this year. But they say they're going to take it, and I take him at his word. Imagine what happens to these companies if they're listed on foreign exchanges at the time, to their valuations, and how that affects their market. So pulling them back to Hong Kong, which they now control because they took Hong Kong, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pulling them back and getting them on a domestic market insulates those companies and their future valuations to a degree, when and if there is a greater kind of conflict against Western markets. So I think, when you see these Holding Foreign Company Accountable Act come out of our Congress, which is a very watered down, shitty legislation, but I'll take it. It's a step in the right direction. That would have notionally indicated that in 2 or 3 years, companies that don't meet these accounting oversight regulations would be delisted. Well, she's not going to make that the narrative. He's going to make the narrative, no, I'm calling them back. It's right. You're not kicking us out. We don't want to be there. But as a part of that benefit as well, yeah, where there's a South China Sea conflict, where there's a Straits of Taiwan conflict, it's not good for their biggest companies to be listed on foreign exchanges exclusively. That's my take.
Do you think that he blinked? Did he blink here? He was on course. This was a a superpower on its way to surpassing the United States in economic and also, to some degree, eventually political and economic and military importance. And now he's saying we're going back to the bad old days. Did he just make a mistake, do you think, in terms of geopolitical?
Look, he has more information than I do. So I think there are graveyards littered all over China and the world with people who think President Xi has made mistakes. He tends to...
You mean that literally, don't you?
I do mean that literally.
Yes. Okay.
He tends to make what are perceived mistakes advantages for his country. And for better or worse, he doesn't have to really worry about political parties criticizing him so much, or the media criticizing him so much, or getting reelected every 4 years in a majority or a minority of, the Politburo, Congress for them. So I think he views this as the logical next step to do all the things that you were saying maybe made him blink. I think he sees this as something that's going to get them to the world's biggest economy, something that's going to get them to the world's biggest military. They're now a regional superpower with denial of access to anything near their shorelines, right? I mean, without catastrophic loss of life anyway. And they're doing this Belt and Road policy, coming into Africa where they're buying up ports, defaulting the countries on debts, making them deep water ports, and now they're naval installations, and they're leapfrogging from Africa to South America, and they're going to try and rattle our cage in our hemisphere. And that is exactly the plot and the plan over the next 10 years to bring that, if you're looking at a map, to just kind of bring it down through Africa and then leapfrog off the west of Africa into South America. And then, boom, we've got to worry about them over here the way they worry about us in the South China Sea. That's what they're doing.
Okay. Well, we'll see whether the internal contradictions of the communist system catch up with them before they catch up with China, before they are able to reach their goals. I guess that's...
Look, it's deeply troubling with the kind of relationship they have with Russia now, that it's very smart of them to say that, look, we can open up a Western front vis-a-vis Russia, rattling cages in Ukraine again, Lithuania, Estonia, all those NATO nations that, that we should not have included in NATO because they're very, very small countries right on the border of Russia. That was bound to piss them off. And, with Putin starting trouble over there, America can ill afford to be over there helping out Europe and dealing with China if a problem happens. That's just, that's a war on two fronts, right? That didn't work out well for Germany. And I think that's part of the plan too. But no, this is you interviewing me. See how you did that? Huh? I see how you did that. You're a sneaky guy.
Force of habit. What can I tell you?
What's on tap for you, Richard? What are you doing next? Are you just going to continue to write about boring people like, short sellers and investment managers, or?
Actually, I'm thinking of starting my own podcast and maybe a short selling for teasing.
Yeah, everybody's got jokes. Yeah, 10,000 comedians out of work. Look who's trying to be funny.
Look, there's a lot. I see holes in journalism and what's being covered that I would like to fill. It's unfortunately the traditional. A lot of the
holes he wants to fill. Jeez,
I didn't mean it that way. You filthy minded.
This is a family program.
#me too.
Yeah, I'm uncomfortable.
There are swaths of the economy and political scene that I don't think are being well covered. Despite some excellent, look, there's great journalism out there, but I remember when you had to look over your shoulder every moment to what the different competition was doing, whether it be the Wall Street Journal, the Bloomberg, New York Times, Wash Post, FT. And I'm not seeing those kind of breaking investigative stories, with a couple of notable exceptions. Theranos was a great one, but that was started 5 years ago. You know
why that happened in the media rather than in the markets? Because they weren't publicly traded. We were dying for that company to ever go public.
Right.
Same thing with WeWork. And both those companies were so bad that you just couldn't keep the chatter down. And I'm really glad, quite frankly, that both those companies were exposed before they went public. Because, think of all the people. Yeah, exactly.
Just think of the widows and orphans, if you want to put it that way, or just
agreed.
The people that are there. Who was it? Oh, I guess it was Carlson. It was Carson Plow who would say, stop for a moment. And, he was talking about his hate mail that he was getting. And it's like, and how that upset him. And then he said, no, these aren't the bad guys. These are the guys that bet their money trying to make back whatever they lost, from the financial crisis to last year's sell off. They're just trying to.
And those are the people we're getting letters from. Yeah. Listen, you're ruining people's lives. You're a financial terrorist, and I hope you rot in hell. Love, Mom. It's just like, those are the letters. They're from your neighbors and your, regular people who just don't really understand what's going on. And you have to be wrong, because if you are wrong, then they'll make money. I've said this, unfortunately, over and over again for the last 10 or 12 years. What I found being involved in the markets in the way I am is that the vast majority of Americans would rather make money on a fraud than lose money on the truth.
Yeah, that's problematic, actually, when you think about it, because frauds eventually, there are only a couple of people who make money off the frauds, and those are the fraudsters. So you also said you see a hole to fill in political reporting. I see that fraught with peril. I have to say, Richard, I've spent a couple of days with you, right? When you're doing your story, and I talked to you in the past a little bit. I still, and kudos to you for I'm still not quite sure where you lean. I think you lean left, but you definitely don't wear it on your sleeve like some do. Do you think you could write evenly between the right and the left, or do you think you would have too much of a bias? Which is where I think the problem is. To define right and left,
please.
Because no, there's a difference between the traditional right-wing, small government, limited, keep the deficit down, laissez-faire approach. I may disagree with that, but it's not unethical, certainly, and there's a lot of good reason. And there is, and then there's the part of the. Why am I mincing my words here? There are parts of the Trumpist aspects of the Republican Party that have no interest in the truth, and I don't feel like I don't think we're pulling your punches and doing the, guess what? Sometimes it is black and white, and either the president, either those presidential tax returns are accurate or they're not accurate.
Yeah, either you're going to release them or you're not.
Are you going to release them or not? It's not, and then you can say, well, there's no constitution. Well, if they should be published. And I'm a big believer in the First Amendment and what you find and what you do through your journal. The results of your journalism should be publicized. And if somebody wants to sue you, and they do, that's one thing. But I also think that maybe, and I know this is controversial in certain circumstances, the cost of the court should be taken up by the losing side in a situation like that.
I would be fine with that. I've won every single time, and I don't get anything for it. But you kind of fell into your, just in my view of hearing what you just said. I mean, like you say, what's the difference between the right and the left? Define the right or the left is, I think, what you said. The right is, unfortunately at this point, somebody that gets, sexually aroused when they hear Donald Trump speak. The left is somebody that gets aroused when they hear AOC speak. It's just like these cult of personalities. And it's back to what you were saying. Like, there was that old ethos of smaller government, smaller regulation, paying off debt, might have been a more conservative point of view, where
hawkish foreign policy generally.
Foreign policy,
yes.
Right. They could not, the Republican Party and that has been elected anyway over the last 10 or 15 years could not credibly make that point anymore about smaller government and debt and things of that nature. They've been just as bad. And then there's, the left where, now we're talking about debt on a epic scale, and we really want to run things from babysitting on up. So it's these extremes. And do you think you're
yes, I don't disagree with you. I think that some of the language that you're hearing from the squad in particular, some of it is nonsensical, and just plain wrong concerning Medicare for all, which is maybe a great idea in theory, but the cost of $31 trillion over 10 years is prohibitive. And saying that you can pay for it with Defense Department accounting adjustments, no, that's just wrong. And you should be called out on that.
Not the least of which the Defense Department doesn't do accounting. But go ahead.
Was that? I didn't even think of it that way. But in any case, the alleged fraud in Defense Department, that was one of the things that was brought up. Just basic, simple accounting, mathematics, not accounting. And people should be alert to that, because while you have a threat to the Republic from the Trumpist wing of the Republican Party, which seems to be most of it at this stage.
Oh, don't say that.
Well, it seems to be. I'm talking about the people in Congress. Maybe, yeah.
I will say this, Rich. It's probably the same, and I think it applies on both sides. It's the same 8-10 clowns on both sides, and being moderate or centrist or what I would call normal doesn't sell. It's not sexy. It doesn't have a great story. It's the hard left, defund the police. Well, then you talk to the people in the areas where they defund the police and be like, hell no, give us more cops. And then the percentage of people who are the mouth breathing Trumpers, I don't necessarily think they're all about Trump. It's more about F you to the other side, because this is what you've tried to push through. And there's no great story about do your thing, let me hang out and do my thing, and I don't care.
Says the mouth-breathing Trumper.
Who, me? No.
Well, look, let me bring up my son again. When the Black Lives Matter demonstrations began, we were in the city in June, I believe, and they were ramping up, and he wanted to attend them. And I said to him, well, just two things that you should, three things. I still want you to wear a mask, although that didn't appear to be necessary. Number two, they will begin chanting things that you don't agree with. And people will use those as slogans. Just be aware of that. You don't have to chant.
Advice.
And then I said, and not to be a daddy downer, but this happens every 20 years, you can go back to civil rights. It can go back to your late grandfather who was Montgomery bureau chief, Alabama bureau chief for International News Service. This happens every 20 years. And then there's a big hullabaloo, and then nothing changes. So I'm just going to tell you that, and I'm not happy about that. But getting back to your point, there is this. I think you're right concerning the squad who have gotten all this, who've gotten a disproportionate amount of attention because they're loud. Because that's the tenor of the times, and that will actually redound to damage the Democratic Party and steer us back to some sort of normalcy, if I'm going to say it, that's going to be a problem.
He gave it away there. He said, steer us. You Democrat, you.
I will tell you that for my entire
you can't go off the
career,
record now.
my entire career, from when I was voting age to this year, I was not a member of a political party.
Okay, congratulations. Not that makes a difference since you've come out on our show. Congratulations. Look, I think you gave your son...
by the way, I'm just going to have to correct. I just don't want to leave the wrong impression there.
Oh, everybody knows I'm joking. I mean, listen,
no. I just want to know. I did join the Democratic Party this year for the mayoral elections because I was worried in New York City.
But de Blasio would be reelected and you didn't want that?
I wanted to write him in. That was the key part.
You wanted to write in de Blasio?
No, you actually can't because his term limits were over.
You want de Blasio for another term? I'm going to jump out my window.
Yeah, it was de Blasio. I love that guy.
Oh my God!
No. But there were several candidates that I didn't want. I didn't think would make good mayors.
Did you like the I forget his name, the former police officer who won?
Eric Adams.
Yeah, I think I like him.
Well, actually, what's nice was that you could choose however many. What is it? 5?
Yeah, they have
people,
tiered.
So you could actually go and pick the ones that you liked most, but you knew weren't going to win, and then put them down and just So
look, I understand what you did, and I think part of our problem in this country are closed primaries. I wish they were all open, actually, because what I've said to people, Jed, the director of the China Hustle, good guy, but he just says over and over again, the Republican Party needs to be burned to the ground. And it's like, okay, not helpful. The only thing more dangerous to a country than a two-party republic is a one-party republic. Mm-hmm. So you can't really burn one of them to the ground. But if you really want to change a party, join it. And then you can vote in primaries and you can have more of a say at what's going on there than being a part of a party that you already agree with. Try and bring them both to the center. And nobody seems to really like that idea. I don't.
Tribalism, right?
You're absolutely right that the way our system is constructed, you need 2 political parties.
Oh, you need 3 or 4. We only have 2.
Well, but the way that our democracy works is the third party gets kind of
and the 2 parties
ignored.
In power make sure that you're not going to have a third party.
Yeah,
they've made it so onerous for any kind of defined. Yeah, there's independent, there's libertarian. I mean, who knows what any of those things mean? Independent means nothing, so nebulous. Libertarian means you can drink Drano on the side of a street. I don't know. But there's no real centrist kind of party that could pop up now because it's so hard to get those parties on every ballot in every state, voted in, blah, blah, blah. So it is a very difficult thing. And we're all, for those of us stuck in the middle, we're stuck in the middle. And we'll just do what we can to put our finger in the dike. What does it make you
Watch it.
That's a saying.
Stop filling holes with things.
That's a saying, dummy. So I'd love to see you write about politics. I don't know that I've seen that with you. So
I think you were the closest, and you saw how that turned out.
Swill.
I take it back. I don't think I want to see you writing about politics.
No, I mean, by the way, when I say politics, there's a huge intersection with money and politics.
You think?
Yeah, and
no independent Fed anymore.
Hold it a second. I've done a fair number of pieces on the New York on the Federal Reserve System, and
is that back when they were kind of quasi-independent as opposed to now?
Well, do you think? Well, hold on. Let me back up there because I'd love to hear your opinion on this. I was not a big fan of. I wasn't a partisan against Jerome Powell, but didn't he just save the world financial system last year?
Oh, I thought that was Geithner. Boy, they're all saving the financial system, aren't they? Anything that doesn't actually destroy the financial system gets our Fed chair anointed as the person who saved it. That's where we are on the precipice for these last 10 or 12 years. Every successive Fed chair has saved the financial system. No, our financial system's in desperate peril. $30 trillion in debt. Are you kidding me? I mean, if our interest rate was 3%, our debt service would be $900 billion a year. That's more than we spend on the military.
It's not 3%, though. The rates aren't at 3%. This is the time, buy low, sell high.
Okay.
Sell now, and when it's 1%. I'm not
Richard,
not
it's been 1% forever. And you know what? My people's grandparents that are in their 80s don't really need to be so invested in the stock market, but they can't do anything else because they can't get 3% interest in a bank account or a CD anymore like they used to and have safe money. So everything is at risk. So yeah, it does matter that we can't have interest rates at what I would consider a normalized level, non-zero or thereof, because we have so much debt that we can't service it. And for all you ignoramuses who think, oh, okay, we just won't pay back China, they only have less than $1 trillion of that debt. The Fed owes itself like $9, $10, $11 trillion of that debt. The other's unfunded pensions and liabilities of ours. So when we're not paying somebody back, look at yourself. You're the somebody not getting paid back. That's why it matters.
Okay, but I'd say if you're going to run up debt in a crisis situation, which I think last year we would say that that last year the COVID-19 pandemic was a crisis situation.
Sure, that's why you shouldn't be $20 trillion in debt before a crisis happens, so that you can deal with the crisis.
It's absolutely right that's a leftover from the last crisis.
But the pandemic was artificially created, and our GDP coming out of it should have been through the roof. 2.8, 2.9%.
What do you mean by artificially created?
Because we forced everyone to shut
down the economy. We shut down the economy.
Listen, hindsight is 20/20. Okay, nobody knew how bad this could get until, and we didn't get a lot of great information out of the past administration in the early stages of this pandemic, right? It's not a problem. You don't need a mask. It is a problem. You do need a mask. So, being cautious about a pandemic is probably the prudent thing to do. But the point is that you should have a balanced budget and you should have a low rate of debt so that when you do, right or wrong, when you do these things, you can afford to do them and be able to pay it back off. But we've taken 20 trillion and turned it into 30 trillion.
Yeah.
And, look, Obama administration probably put a third of that on there. And then, Trump criticized the hell out of him while he was campaigning about debt. And then he did the exact same thing. And, now we are where we are.
Our election cycles are such that, nobody is left. America is left holding the bag. And the electoral consequences for bad decisions really fall onto the next, maybe even not the next president, but the president after that. So
the last four presidents should have something on their desk that says the buck does not stop here.
That's a good idea. I like that. Does Joe Biden have one of the buck stops here?
I mean, you could ask him. I don't know if he'd remember.
Yeah, I think he said it, but come on, man.
It's still early with him. I hope it goes well. I hope. I root for every president we have. I really do. I disagree with them, often, but it doesn't mean I want them to fail tomorrow. I mean, that's wanting our country to fail tomorrow. So you just hope things get back on track. But I have seen that since maybe George H.W. that nobody's been willing to take a bullet, right? Where H.W. said, read my lips, no new taxes. And then we had Desert Storm and the Kuwait invasion and a war over it. And, the guy says, okay, listen, we had a war. We got to pay for it. So we're going to have to raise taxes. And that really cost him.
Yeah, that cost him the election, I think. But the recession really helped as well, so.
Well, yeah. You raise taxes and things like that can happen. And interest rates go up and oil prices and all that stuff. But I think Clinton benefited from him saying the buck stops here. And I don't know that it's really kind of happened since. And, you can put it on Congress too. I mean, the obstructionist, I push back that the real obstructionist part of Congress came in with Gingrich.
Well, he pioneered it. It was just, and then he hurt, and then it redounded to bite him, which, his stonewalling, if you would, and obstinacy. And then Clinton came back, and I'm sorry, I'm just forgetting when Clinton won re-election. That was
Dole.
Well, that was that was a function of that. But getting back.
I'd love to see you write about this. I think I'm going to send you a list. I'd like to see you write about AOC.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you imagine yourself requesting to do an article on her? Could it happen? You're both New Yorkers.
Well, maybe not with Institutional Investor, but I'm a free agent,
yeah.
So that's out there, and frankly, sometimes I think there is stuff that should be written. I mean, I've always been fascinated by the donors to her campaign pack, being mostly from tech companies, or largely, which is ironic. It's the Amazon, Apple, these guys, and she's not, but she accepts the money, and that's okay. I mean, I understand that's
though. I think she's drawing the line of drug companies anyway, isn't she? I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, she says she is.
Oh, she did. I see. This is why I have to research this.
I know Hillary didn't. On a serious note, I do have somebody I would like an in-depth Richard Teitelbaum interview on, because I think he's done some good, and I think he's an asshole at times, but there's a lot of good happening there with Dave Portnoy and Barstool Sports.
Okay.
And getting in the Davey Day Trader. So there's that financial angle, but it's pretty famously, he and I have disagreed on a few things, but to go out there and help small business during the pandemic, and put your money where your mouth is and to care that way. But yet at the same time to be somebody who's like the original uncancelable. You know, if you research that, some of the things he's said would get any human being on the planet canceled, and he's able to just not let that happen. I think it would be an interesting story for you, the way you long form write. So try that.
Yeah, it takes me 1,000 words to clear my throat. As my editor once said, like, you know, Richard, you're not getting paid by the word on this one. And I said, I got to change that.
Yeah, it's funny because I started to read through your book in anticipation of the podcast. And there was one part in the book where you were like, this 6'2", 260-pound man lumbered after her like a bear chasing, and I was just like picturing a bear just running after a woman.
That's just like one Fabio novel too many, isn't it? So, anything else from Richard that's going to tantalize us to find your future columns? You're still going to be almost exclusively with II?
You know, as I said, it's there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's, you know, and I'm watching former colleagues of mine as they leave the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal, moving to Substack. There's new and other outlets. So, you know, there's a lot of opportunity out there. And really, I just got to motivate myself and make sure that what I'm writing about is fun, accurate, and, you know, moves the needle somewhat.
Well, that sounds like a good gig if you can get it. How about a future book? Have you got any plans for a future book?
I do, sort of. I am interested in a history of activist investing. But the manpower is, I mean, I'm having sketched out an outline. The man hours that will go into that will be off the charts. And
are you talking about like a historical point of view from
it would be a kind of a history
to where it is now?
Yeah, but I'd like to get the campaigns in there, which are so interesting, and display different tactics, and, you know, it's changed over the year and it goes back centuries. So it has that historical resonance.
Yeah, I would love to read that personally, if you get that done. I know it's a lot of man hours, but the historical significance of it, that it does go back hundreds of years. And even in the 80s, Carl Icahn was a corporate raider. Now he's an activist investor. You ask him what the difference is, he says, I have a bigger boat. I mean, like, what is the difference? And you're not even talking about like activist shorts. You're talking about just like agitating for change on either side of that equation, right? Long or short.
Yeah, the short sellers would be part of it, but certainly I think most of it is on the long side. And I'm also interested. I mean, there is one issue, which is, hey, do these guys, I know that I suspect that on average they make a profit, but what about the companies themselves? And do they benefit from it? I would love to talk to Paul Singer about this. I'm sure we'll sit down for a nice long conversation.
Well, look, I mean, nothing ventured, nothing gained. If there's one thing I could say that I think you don't, like, in that initial phase, like to really bother or badger people into becoming a subject, and you probably should. If you're going to write about something this grand and this big, you've got to get the perspective of the Paul Singers, especially if you're posing it as, I want your perspective. This is not about Paul Singer. This is about Paul Singer's perspective on activist investing. Mm-hmm, you got a better shot there. I mean, I love the idea so much. I'm trying to get you to do it. The short thing, I don't know how interesting that is. I can tell you why there's short activists. There's only two real reasons why short activism has flowered in the last 20 years. It's one, the fact that everybody now realizes there's no such thing as a real investment bank analyst, right? I mean, they are completely attached to the banking arm. And on any given day, if an analyst just downgrades to a hold, a company's going to call the banking arm and say, we're never going to do business with you again. That just happens every day. And two, the second thing is the death of investigative journalism. As a big center of news at major publications, right? It's too costly. There's too much litigation involved. And they're, outside of somebody like a Bill Alpert.
Yeah, I was thinking of Bill Alpert, but Gretchen Morgensen. I don't see her in the Journal or the Times, and
right.
It's a shame too, because if nothing else, it was a great read. That was why I wanted to read the New York Times business section.
Right, and you could write about it. There were checks and balances, and you as the author, didn't have to be invested to make money. You got a paycheck, right? But for that, you got liability protection. And, now for our business model to work, and we have to make money because we've got to defend the lawsuits and we've got to defend the fight that's going to ensue from being critical, where you had people like you in investigative journalism 20 years ago had Time Warner or whoever else to protect them. Now they don't. Even 60 Minutes sucks.
I have to say I haven't looked at 60 Minutes in quite a while, so I can't weigh in on that.
Well, you just did. I mean, I remember as a child, even 5 or 6 years old, it was a Sunday night tradition to watch 60 Minutes with my father. And in the last 10 years, it is so watered down. I'd hoped Vice News would kind of take over when they were doing that thing on HBO, that Vice. Mm-hmm. They were pretty good at going and exposing and doing the undercover. And even they either got Me Too'd or something happened, but nobody's doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So that's why there's activist shorts. There's your history.
Okay.
That's one chapter. That's it.
That's one chapter. Okay, we got it. Okay, I'm on my way. Now find me a publisher and sell my movie rights, okay?
I don't know how to do that. Look, I've always found you a wildly interesting guy. And I think you should do more of these things to talk about your perspective and your writing. Maybe even do podcasts with some of your bigger stories to go along with them, your next profile or whatever. I'd be happy as long as I'm interested in the person and the subject to bring your articles to more readers. Have a podcast with it or join somebody's podcast with it, because I think you're a really good writer, in spite of the fact that your titles suck.
I used to say my byline begins underneath the headline.
Yeah, okay.
I used to say that when I was at Bloomberg until somebody said, using that line as grounds for immediate dismissal, because that would be my standard thing. I didn't write it, and it was always true. I never wrote the headline. And then they said no.
And you still don't, as you've indicated with II, institutional investor. But I will add this one thing about Bloomberg. I have never, ever met a reporter that liked working there. Oh. Now, you have not said either way. I'm just kind of leaning from it. But I've never met somebody who actually liked the editorial process and dealing with their editor at Bloomberg or really working there as a writer.
I was very fortunate because I was not on the wire service side, because as I said, it takes me 1,000 words to clear my throat and a half an hour to write my byline. But I was very fortunate because I was on the magazine side. So I had at least a month to do a story. And also my editors were old colleagues of mine from Fortune magazine. So we were kind of off on our own. I miss my colleagues there.
Yeah, but didn't they demote you though at Bloomberg?
No, they kicked me off the magazine and put me on the billionaires list, which I maintained my title and my pay. And then they fired me after that.
That's a demotion.
That's a demotion, yes.
Why did they fire you, Richard? Did you? Come on.
My personal, well, no, okay. So this is opinion and slanted and biased opinion. I think it was because I wrote a story about the former Treasury Secretary saying that he had leaked some information on putting Fannie and Freddie into conservatorship to a group of hedge fund managers and other investors before he did that he essentially let them know. I wrote that story.
You're talking about Geithner.
No, this was Hank Paulson.
Oh, before
before
that.
Yeah, no, he when Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac were put into conservatorship, if you remember 2008 in the summer, this question, what's going to go on with them? And it was declining, and it was.
I just didn't think that got decided until Geithner got in, but man, I guess I'm wrong about that.
No, this was Geithner was still New York Fed.
Yeah.
At that point. And the SEC opened an investigation. It was into the story. It was a front page article in the Wall Street Journal, not Bloomberg. I had moved on to book leave. And then shortly after I returned from book leave, a group of us were fired. And by that point, I was on the billionaires list, which I didn't think of as being. Billionaires is kind of a hybrid between journalism and an educated guess on people's wealth.
Lifestyles of the rich and shameless.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was kind of it. So I found it. So I was fired like within 5 months of my returning from my book leave, and shortly after the Wall Street Journal had written the story that the SEC was investigating these hedge fund managers and and Hank Paulson's actions on that. I believe that was a August afternoon. And that's just that. Now, the other thing is that, I'm sure I was paid more than most people, and I was fired along with a gazillion other people at Bloomberg that October. So
can a journalist at Bloomberg, a writer at Bloomberg, make a couple $100,000 a year?
It depends on who they are.
So yes,
if you get hired as fresh out of high school, fresh out of college.
No. I mean, top journalists, are they making a couple $100,000 a year?
Some of them are. I would put it at mid. They are in the low six figures. Couple $100,000 gets a little bit steep. That's
$200,000 is the second lowest six figures there is. I mean,
I get that too.
Even numbers. There's one, and then there's two.
Yeah, in between there, I'd say a seasoned, experienced journalist likely gets paid something in there.
So that's impactful if you lose that job. I think that matters. Yeah. As I said, nothing against Bloomberg. I'm on their program from time to time, but the truth is I've never actually met a journalist that, head to tail enjoyed their experience there. And
okay, do you want to say that you've met one? Because I did. I did a lot of important
so
journalism.
Tell me about it. The day you got fired in August, you're like, gee, that was fun.
Yeah, it was actually, I think, October. And yes, I think I knew that I was at the end of remember I'd moved from magazine writing to doing these mini profiles of, Jim Simons and whoever. And so I was kind of like, something, if it's time to go, it's time to go. Unfortunately, my daughter, I have a special needs daughter, was in I hope this isn't too much information. Maybe she was in the ICU at the time, in intensive care unit.
She's things to worry about.
She's fine. Yeah. So I was like, good. Something, let me just make sure my healthcare insurance is in order and that of my daughter. And but you can count me as somebody who said that they enjoyed their 10-year career at Bloomberg.
Okay,
And,
I don't know if I believe you, but I'll accept it at face value. How's that? I will.
Free snacks, man. What else can I tell you?
You know that they do it right. When you're doing television at Bloomberg, I will say, I mean, way better than CNBC or CNN or any of that. You go in there and you get this like massively cool umbrella, with Bloomberg on it, and I was like, yeah, well, I'll take two. And they've got kind of a nice open space in there for free thought and whatever their snack areas are. Pretty cool. They're really kind of more of a Silicon Valley vibe, I would say their office is than any of the others.
Very much has the key to the success of Bloomberg, as much as I like to take credit for it myself, is actually the mathematics and the various analytics that they have in their system, which are indispensable for an enormous swath of Wall Street. And nobody, try as they might, nobody's been able to replicate that.
No, I agree. I've tried. Yeah, I give them that. The original business model and the original product is still probably the best that they have. I've tried the others and they're just nowhere near as robust. When you actually learn to use, I don't know very many people that actually know the full output of a Bloomberg terminal. That's how robust it can be. Right?
Yeah. No, there's no way that you could know everything that it does. When I was leaving Bloomberg in my exit, whatever interview or my negotiation, they don't really negotiate, so don't bother.
Most people who fire you don't.
Yeah, because you're at a disadvantage there,
You're still fired.
I have fired hundreds, if not thousands of people, and in not one case were they in the advantage.
No, but I asked for my, I said, if I give you back some of my severance, can I have a Bloomberg terminal for at least a couple of years? The answer was no, but that was.
I mean, if you give back $22,000 a year of your severance, you can have one.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I was hoping I could get like a deal, but
no.
Yeah, they don't. Well, I mean, I guess if you get a bunch of them, they'll do a deal. But that's kind of a cool story that actually Carl brought out. Congratulations, Carl. That was fun. And we look forward to having you on. I hope you do join us again when you're writing your next big story and you want to talk about that profile in conjunction with your publishing. That should be fun.
AOC.
That sounds cool. And yes, I'll get on that AOC story right away.
I definitely think you should. I think more to the point, you should get on your book story and don't let the massive man hours intimidate you. It's a good idea for a story and just take them 1 hour at a time.
Better than my hagiographic biography of AOC. Okay.
All right. So where do we follow you? How do we follow you? Do you publish everything you write on Twitter? Do you have a website?
I for reasons we've kind of touched on, I don't do very much Twitter. I dip into it now and then, but I don't comment. If I write something, I want to be paid for it. That makes for very terse birthday greetings from me. Happy birthday. Yeah. Your father, Richard Teitelbaum,
Happy birthday, love, Dad.
That's it. So I know that's short-sighted in my own way, but I think it also saves me some agita. Yeah. So yes, institutional investor is my primary, where I am primarily at this stage, and we'll see what happens. There's a great crew there.
Great.
And so this has been a lot of fun.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. And for those of you that have enjoyed it, you could retweet us. You could hit like. Again, from our show, if you didn't enjoy it, I don't really fucking care. So don't retweet it. Don't like it. But thanks for joining us anyway. And thank you, Richard, for joining us. Always a pleasure. And to our listeners, thanks for listening. If you like what you heard, leave us a comment, give us a retweet, follow us on Twitter. Thanks for joining us.
If you hear him howling around your kitchen.